Reports about the murders of 4 Idaho College students. A former medical examiner believes the toxicology reports in this case could help solve this murder. This coming after the coroner assigned to the case called the tests irrelevant to the horrific killings. A police officer's body cam also picked up a loud sound that could have been a scream around the time of the murders. Also, a convicted killer on death row believes the killer was waiting inside of the house before the savage stabbing spree. We want to bring in now former FBI agent Tracy Walder for her insight into these reports. Tracy, thank you so much for being back.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.
And first, what do you make of the San Quentin death row inmate giving an interview saying that he believes the killer was already waiting inside of the house? Does this theory have any merit?
I don't want to say that it doesn't necessarily, because the reality is we still have no answers and we still have no suspects. And so what I do think is interesting, and what I do think lends a lot of credibility and interest to this perspective, is the fact that he is a criminal and he is inside the mind of a criminal. A lot of times, we rely on profilers and things of that nature who are not necessarily, of deviant mind and involved in these kinds of activities. And so I do think that his theory has merit, but obviously I certainly cannot say if it's fully credible or not. Now, I do think it could possibly explain how the person perhaps knew the house so well if they hadn't been to the house before. But then I think it really, in a weird way, casts a wider net in terms of suspects, and that perhaps this isn't someone who's in either an immediate or sort of periphery friend circle of the individuals. And I think that in and of itself is scary. The only reason I'm a little hesitant to fully embrace his theory is that the police, the one consistent thing they have done is they've been pretty consistent in discussing the fact that this is a targeted killing, which tells me it's probably less likely that person that was unknown to them was laying in wait.
I appreciate that. And I know that you're also tracking this issue. There was CCTV footage, but it was lost after a week. What happened there? Why wasn't it reviewed in time?
I've tried to be very pro law enforcement in this case, and I am very much pro law enforcement. I do think that they are doing a good job. But one of the things that I did read that was slightly frustrating to me is that there was CCTV. As we know, there's a clerk at one of the convenience stores who came forward and said they had perhaps the Hyundai on CCTV. However, that CCTV was recorded over after a week, and that the footage was asked for about 3 to 4 weeks later. I'm very surprised because what I think law enforcement probably would have and should have done at that case was asked for footage of really anything along the transportation route of where those houses are, and then they can go back and sort of go through it. But they should have asked that all of it be preserved initially, even if they didn't have time to go through all of it.
And we understand that law enforcement is completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of evidence and footage and photos that they are going through. Does this perhaps indicate, though, that some things may be falling through the cracks?
No one's perfect. No entity is perfect. No human is perfect. And I do think this may have been a situation where something did slip through the cracks. Typically, what we would do is immediately ask for it. And even if you are overwhelmed, which is completely understandable in this case, then you at least save it from being erased or recorded over so that you can come back to it when you are able to look through it. So yes, something like this very well may have slipped through the cracks, but I'm just speculating at this point.
And right now there's dispute over how relevant the toxicology reports are in this case. What do you make of that?
Yes, I thought that was really interesting too, and I'm surprised that there's a dispute about it because, in my opinion, we don't have a suspect, right, in terms of what we know, and so I'm very surprised that they are perhaps deemed by some to be irrelevant because they really might go towards helping towards a motive, helping towards the state of mind of the victims. If the victims were incredibly intoxicated when this was happening, it might really go to show and completely rule out the other roommates, and that maybe screams weren't happening, people weren't fighting back. And so I do think they are relevant, although I'm not sure that they're relevant at finding us a suspect.
And what about the high-pitched sound that police body cams picked up? Do you think that those could have been screams? Can anything be made of the timing there? And does that warrant further investigation?
I think anything that's going around in that vicinity that's on any of those cameras that we're hearing or seeing will be relevant that happened at that time. It has to be. You can't rule it out immediately because of what we know happened. I am on the fence in terms of what I think these may be. I do think they very well could be tires kind of speeding away. And if they are, that's interesting as well. If someone is kind of peeling out of an area where they just involved in something that they shouldn't have been. And so even if they are the victim screams as well, then that kind of narrows you in closer to the time of death.
Former CIA officer and FBI Special Agent Tracy Walter, thank you as always.